You can't stop change more than you can stop the suns from setting. Sometimes life is about the ability to believe in where you are going, even when you don't know exactly where that is. The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. Don't be afraid of change. You may lose something good, but you may gain something even better. Rhett, you will be missed. Let's get it popping.
Oh, Brett, we miss you, man, for real.
That's
I forgot I was supposed to do that.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
Welcome to the show, everybody. This is Fourth and Frames. I'm your host, Chris Battistone. With me tonight is my co-host, Drew Scott. And tonight we cover the AFC South and all the fantasy football implications. We'll be giving you a must, bust, and maybe player from each team across the AFC South. And no one better to do that with than host of Caught Stealing from the Fantasy Alarm Fantasy Baseball Podcast. 2023 King Classic winner. Last year, we labeled them hopeful Houston Texans fan. This year, I think we can label them confident Houston Texans fan. Mr. Colby Conway. Colby, welcome back to the show, man.
I appreciate that. Looking forward to talking with you fellas here, especially because the division we're previewing tonight will have the AFC representative coming out of it here in this division. So important division to break down here tonight.
You really think the Jaguars are going to win the AFC South? I thought you were a Houston Texans fan, Colby. Why are you doing yourself like that?
Cut that out. It's too early. We're a couple minutes in to already start with this. Way too early.
Drew, man, how you been? How's your week been? Are you excited to talk AFC South? I know one of your favorite players is in it.
Several of them. Hopefully we'll get to talk about them tonight. Yeah, I'm doing good, man. My birthday was actually yesterday, so I turned 23 years old yesterday.
Happy birthday!
Yeah, thank you. I spent my 33rd birthday working the first part of the day, and then both of my kids had dentist appointments, and then I ordered some Chinese food whenever I got home.
Day in the office.
Yeah, but it might have been my favorite birthday yet, though, man. My kids went to Walmart, picked out some stuff for me that they thought I'd like, brought it home to me. So it turns out getting old isn't all that bad as long as you enjoy the people you're getting old with. So it was a really good day, man.
Yeah, that's terrific. You're not that old, Drew. Come on, 33. It's a great young age, brother. Great young age. 33 is the new 23, man.
Well, I don't know. According to my wife, she tells me all the time she don't fail to remind me about how old I am. So I guess it depends on who you ask.
If you were a running back, you'd be collecting your old age pension. Red man,
yeah.
We appreciate you, Red. Appreciate you tuning in, brother. Like I mentioned at the top, we're going to be covering the AFC South, the Houston Texans, the Indianapolis Colts, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Tennessee Titans. Then we're going to give you a bold prediction from each team across the board. Colby, how excited are you for the Houston Texans this season?
As excited as I've been in a long time, to be honest. Like, this is dating back to like the years of 2012 when it was like Matt Schaub, Andre Johnson, and Arian Foster, like the hope that team had. Like, it's been a couple of down years in Houston, to say the least, but things are on the up and up. And if they're as good as I think they're going to be, I'm going to be unbearable. I'm just going to get it out of the way now.
I feel that,
I'm just going to say it now, just because it's been a couple of years of kind of being down and out, to say the least. And if they're going to be good this year, like I think they are, I'm going to be really unbearable. So I'm saying it now here on July 10th. So that come, maybe early February, it's well noted and well documented that I was going to be how I am acting at that time.
That's so fair. That's the day the Rams traded for Matthew Stafford. I said the same shit. I said, if this works out the way I think it is, you guys aren't going to be able to fucking stand me. So like, I completely get where you're coming from, man. That's how it should be.
Yes, sir. So let's dive into the AFC South and all the fantasy implications from each team across the board. Like I said, we're going to give you a must draft, a bust from each team, and a maybe player, a player that maybe ranks a little bit lower across ADP that could turn out and produce for you this upcoming fantasy season. Colby, let's lead off with the Houston Texans, AFC South champions last year. Looking forward to repeat. Of course, we got to give you the must-draft players so you can gush about your favorite team. Who is the guy that you're going to be telling everybody to draft this August?
I appreciate that. It's gonna be Joe Mixon. We saw it last year. And with the running back position in Houston in a Bobby Slowick offense, they want to run the ball. That's what they want to do. Over 350 plus carries between Singletary and Pierce last year, and Pierce was bad. I got that one wrong. I'll admit that one. I did not expect him to be like that. But here's the thing. Even last year, we saw it with D'Amico Ryans and Bobby Slowick in the new regime. They still prefer a bell cow back. They got confident. Even when Pierce was at his worst, ran him, mixed Singletary. Slight 2-week changing of the guard. All Singletary, hardly even saw Dameon Pierce after that. So what are we going to see here? Mixon's in line for a workhorse role. He's being way too, his ADP is way too low. I'm looking here at NFFC, and he's at running back 15, about a third-round pick in 15 teamers. If you're looking at about pick 46, might put him into the 4th round, I guess, technically. But here's the thing with Mixon. He was solid last year on zone concept runs. Houston does lean a little zone heavy in their runs. They're not like a full-blown zone concept team, but they do run zone concept runs more than they do man. Healthy Titus Howard, improved Kenyon Green, offensive line should be good. And if Houston's going to be good, like I think they will be, they should be leading, not trailing. He's going to get the volume. He'll be the running back that they trust. And for some reason, I just have this weird feeling that Houston's going to throw to the running back position more. Last year they were the team that did it the second least. Only the Rams did it least, believe it or not, in terms of target share to the running back position. So I think Mixon's going to continue his prowess in the pass game. He's simply way too cheap for a workhorse role. And we could be looking at seasoned end. He's one of the top 5 running backs in terms of touches in the league, in terms of total touches. He is unchallenged for touches. And really, they say him and Dameon Pierce are a good 1-2 punch. I don't know how much number 2 is going to be involved in there. It's going to be a ton of Joe Mixon. So draft him at all costs.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I don't think they traded for him and extended him for no reason, So I've got him at running back 12, so I'm slightly ahead of ADP. He's been one of my favorite values at the position in drafts, and a lot of his efficiency metrics haven't been going the right direction necessarily, but he was still pretty good as a runner in the red zone. So he should be there plenty in this offense, and those are going to be his touches, I would imagine. So yeah, I think he's a really good value in drafts right now.
And with the 3-headed monster Houston's running out there at receivers, if they are going to play a lot of 11 personnel and they're going to have the 3 wide receivers out there and Dell, Diggs, and Collins. I mean, you can't load the box with those 3 in there. Soft boxes. And for the love of God, all of the draft capital and money that's in that offensive line, please be as good as you can be. And if so, Mixon's going to be a monster.
Yeah. Question from Rhett. Any concerns about Mixon's 2023 inefficiency, or was it a matter of bad offensive line play in Cincinnati? Now, he did also lose his starting quarterback for a good amount of the year this past season. So that might come into a bit of what Joe Mixon can do. But Colby, does the lack of sexy efficiency metrics worry you at all about Joe Mixon?
Volume's king. It'll make up for it. I mean, he may not pop off 5 yards a carry, but if he's going to get 25 touches a game and put about 4 yards per carry on the ground, he's going to be just fine. So I'm not worried about the inefficiency. I'm excited for him, and he should be excited in this offense that has generally been pretty fantasy friendly to running backs. If we're going to say the San Francisco offense, like that's why I'm not sure if you all have done the NFC South yet, but that's why Alvin Kamara is very intriguing this year because he's going to be in a Shanahan-esque offense, and it's very fantasy friendly to running back. So yeah, all aboard Joe Mixon. I'm not worried about inefficiency. And even if he is a little inefficient, volume's king. Volume makes up for it.
Yep.
2 of his playoff games for fantasy football this year are at home, indoors. The fantasy football playoff schedule for Joe Mixon is toxic. It's the Miami Dolphins, Kansas City Chiefs, and Baltimore Ravens, but that could be good for the running back position when you look at who they're playing and the Texans maybe wanting to kind of slow down the game a bit. That is the must draft for the Houston Texans. Mr. Joe Mixon, acquired from the Cincinnati Bengals, expecting to have a big year. Let's get into the bust, Drew. This one, Colby, you might want to put your earmuffs on for.
This is a running bit for sure at this point. You've never said it, but I mean, every single time we have a guest on, you always make me pick the bus for their favorite team, and never fails, man. So I'm convinced this is just a thing. But I need to start out by saying that this is Stefan Diggs is my bus pick, but this is not me saying that I think that he's washed or that the talent's not there anymore. Like, I'm not one of those guys. I still believe that he can play. I don't think that he's the Stefan Diggs that he was 2 years ago, but even a Stefan Diggs a couple steps back from that is still better than the majority of the league. So it just, for me, it really comes down to an ADP thing. And I agree with ADP that Nico Collins will be the number one option in the offense. He's going to wide receiver 13. I've got him at wide receiver 15. But where things get different for me is that right now in ADP, Stefan Diggs is basically the number 2 for the Texans at wide receiver 23, and then Tank Dell's not long after wide receiver 25. But I got those guys flipped. I've got Dell at 22, and I've got a little bit of a bigger gap than ADP. I've got Diggs down at 31. And I do think that Stroud's going to get to throw more this year, but I already said this, I don't think they brought Mixon over and extended him not to give him plenty of work as well. And I don't know if there's going to be enough to go around for Stroud to be able to support 3 guys damn near in the top 24. I think one of those guys is going to come in lower than projections, and if you have to pick one of those guys to miss out on that, the way that I feel is it's going to be Diggs as the third option in this offense. And the reality is, while I have got him at wide receiver 31, there's like 5 guys that are ahead of him, but are still in the same tier as him for me. So if you want to take the shot on Diggs because he is attached to Stroud, he's a part of the Texans offense, I get it, because he does still carry upside on his own. And, if one of these guys were to go down across the board, obviously the other 2 are going to gain more value. So he has that attached to him as well. But for me, I'm not going to try to project that. And so I just don't think going into the season, assuming that all these receivers are going to stay healthy, that all 3 of these guys are going to hit their ADP. And to me, Diggs is the one that I've got lower. So he would be the bust for me.
Fair. I get it. I mean, it's one of those things when you look at, depending on how you do drafts as well, you're going to look at it of first things first, you're going to figure out who you believe the number 1 is to be, which is Nico Collins. So once you have that, they're going to be the folks who are going to say, why draft Diggs when I can just wait and get Tank Dell? Because that's going to be a very common thing. It's the same thing. Why would I draft Puka and I can get Cooper Kupp 2 rounds later? I get it. Honestly, for redraft, I haven't done a ton of redraft leagues yet. I'm primarily involved in best ball, and I basically become away with 2 of the Texans receivers every single time. And then if I can get them with Stroud, it's a little bit harder sometimes. But on ADP or on Underdog, ADPs are a little inflated. I'm looking at NFC, and Collins is at 13 and Diggs is at 15. I don't like the price for Diggs as wide receiver 15. That is a little rich for my blood even. The one thing I keep coming back to, and I've told this on a couple of podcasts now, and I'm really falling for the anecdote here. I'm going to say that up front. I'm really falling for it. But I keep coming back to this podcast that CJ Stroud did. I don't remember which one it is, but I can figure that out later. But I think it was the one with Micah Parsons where Micah had his dream defense and Stroud was doing his dream offense. He could pick from any dude in the National Football League, and he drew up the play for Tank Dell.
Yeah.
You could pick any receiver in the league, and he put Tank Dell on the field with the main route for him. And we saw it last year. The connection is there. They're obviously best friends. They're doing everything together all off season. Again, I'm not trying to buy too hard into the friends win fantasy football championships narrative here, but like there's something to it. There's really something to it. And honestly, when you look at the Diggs contract, they're out from him after this year.
Yeah.
Like, so why, if they're going to run some 2 wide receiver sets, is Diggs out there? And you go Diggs and Collins, and then you take away from the Stroud and Dell relationship that should be under contract for the next couple of years together. Like there's a lot here with with Diggs. I think Houston's just trying to capitalize on 1 year of Diggs, let him pop off, get paid elsewhere, and leave, and then attack another receiver next year in the draft. And maybe when it comes down to it, if they're going to go to 12 or other personnels with 2 receivers, maybe they do choose to go with Dell and Nico out there, maybe a little bit less Diggs. So Diggs is the receiver I have the least of the 3 of the Houston guys. So again, it's mainly the price, it's not the player. So I'm right there with you.
Yep, I agree 100%.
So the must draft from the Houston Texans was Joe Mixon. The bust draft at his ADP is Stefan Diggs, Jorge Edwards, Colby Conway, awesome fantasy analyst and beer connoisseur. Master of the beers, Colby, are you?
Yes. I don't have my updated count, but I will pull it up and I'll let it know. But well over, let me see, where are we at? Well over 2,700 unique beers that I've tasted in my lifetime.
Wow.
So yeah, we're making good progress.
Nice. I like that. All right, let's get to the maybe draft prospect from the Houston Texans. And there's not a lot of maybe options from this team. I mean, Joe Mixon could have been the maybe just based on what Rhett touched on and what we all touched on in his inefficiency numbers. I could say maybe draft CJ Stroud, but you're drafting CJ Stroud. I could say maybe draft Nico Collins, but you're drafting Nico Collins, and that goes with Tank Dell as well. So my options are very limited, and I did not want to pick Dameon Pierce, so I'm going to go with Dalton Schultz. Now, the addition of Stefan Diggs worries me a little bit, but if we're expecting CJ Stroud to take a little bit more of a jump in his passing yard totals and passing touchdown totals, I think Dalton Schultz as a late round target in your fantasy drafts, especially if you punt the position or stream, should be a target that you want to acquire. Last year for the Houston Texans, only 2 players had double-digit red zone targets. And that was Nico Collins with 15 and Dalton Schultz with 14. So it is in the game plan for Dalton Schultz to be involved where you want your tight ends to be involved. Now, he did only see 60 targets last season, and that is a little alarming for his output on a weekly basis. And that's why Dalton Schultz is a maybe target for you. If you punt the position, if you push the position down, if you want to take a page out of Andrew Cooper's book and go yin and yang tight end, Dalton Schultz might be the yang tight end that you want to acquire. So Dalton Schultz for me is the maybe prospect for the Houston Texans.
Risk-free tight end kind of pick later on in drafts. It's fine with it. Yep. Last year I was riding and dying with him as my main tight end. This year, I won't necessarily be doing that. And there's just some interesting dynamics with the tight end position. They drafted Cade Stover, who the team really liked and really wanted. If you watch the clip, there's a clip that went around of Nick Caserio, I think it was, talking about Cade Stover, just raved about him. Like, you don't talk about a 4th round pick like that. You keep it pretty general with your, like, oh, we like the kid, tough worker, good speed, good production. You keep it pretty general. They went pretty in depth with what they loved about that kid. And then obviously in the playoff game against Cleveland, we got to see Brevin Jordan's athleticism, which is something that Dalton Schultz doesn't exactly have. But Schultz is obviously the sure-handed guy. So, yeah, I think Schultz isn't he's not your starting tight end on a weekly basis this year like we were hoping going into last year. But honestly, risk-free tight end 2 draft. And if he stinks, just cut him and pick up someone else. And you're probably starting someone else every week anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, risk-free tight end choice. If the target breakdown works out like it did last season, Dalton Schultz was 3rd in targets for the Houston Texans and 3rd in total receiving touchdowns. So our must bust and maybe from the Houston Texans, must is Joe Mixon. You must draft Joe Mixon this year. Our bust is Stefan Diggs. So just proceed with caution when drafting Stefan Diggs. Do not reach up for Stefan Diggs. And our maybe prospect from the Houston Texans is Dalton Schultz. Anything else you guys want to talk about Houston Texans before we move on to the Indianapolis Colts?
Nothing for me.
Good to go. All right, let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts. Our must player for the Indianapolis Colts, of course, is Jonathan Taylor, running back when you enter your fantasy football drafts this season, if you want to go hero RB, anchor RB, a robust running back, Jonathan Taylor should be a target for you. As while you're drafting, if you look at what he did either before the injury, after the Jelani, get that comment out of here. After the injury, you can see that Jonathan Taylor was a focal point of what the Indianapolis Colts' game plan, what they wanted to do. Now, that was without Anthony Richardson. Of course, Anthony Richardson's going to cut in to some of the rushing totals for Jonathan Taylor, but if the Indianapolis Colts had half a brain, they would try to limit the amount that Anthony Richardson uses his legs. And I know as fantasy managers, we don't want to hear that if we own Anthony Richardson. But if you look at what Anthony Richardson did last year with injuries, he exited almost every single game. I think Gardner Minshew played almost every single game. He got some kind of snaps in the games that Anthony Richardson was in. So again, we don't want to predict injuries, but if Anthony Richardson goes down, Jonathan Taylor has all the opportunity to finish as the overall running back one. With Richardson there, I don't think he can do it, just because Richardson's going to cut into the rush amount, the rushing touchdown totals, and just on the back end of what Jonathan Taylor did last year. 23 touches, 15 touches, 18 touches, 21 carries, 30 carries to finish out the year. In each one of those games, he scored a touchdown. He had 2 touchdowns against Tampa Bay in that stretch. So Jonathan Taylor, for me, is a player that I'm going to want to acquire because, quite frankly, the NFL is running out of workhorse running backs. Zach Moss is gone. His competition is gone. If you believe Zach Moss was any kind of competition for Jonathan Taylor. So that's why JT is a must draft for you this fantasy season. You guys own a lot of JT? Colby, you own a lot of JT?
I'll tell you what, some of the best ball drafts have had an underdog. If I've been in that back half of the first round, get like a wide receiver, or if one of like the top 3 or 4 running backs falls, getting there. And then if you can get Jonathan Taylor early second round, he's just been a click to draft right away. Don't even think about it. Such a good spot for him this year.
Yeah. Are you more opposed to take Jonathan Taylor or Saquon Barkley in that spot?
I have taken Taylor, I think, every single time.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. You the same, Drew?
Yeah, I'm taking Taylor over Gibbs too. Personally, I've got him at running back 4, so I'm a little bit ahead of ADP on Taylor. So I've been getting him quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Jonathan Taylor or Breece Hall?
Oh, it's still Breece.
I'm Breece.
Still Breece?
Yep.
All right. There it is. Let's head over to the maybe for the Indianapolis, or sorry, yes. No, the bust for the Indianapolis Colts. The bust for the Indianapolis Colts is one of the top-rated wide receivers this year, but Colby's going to tell us why you should stay away from him.
It's the price. I love the player. I really do like Michael Pittman. Was on many of my teams last year. Grateful for what he did. But when I look at it here, like at NFFC, sandwiched right between Nico Collins and Stefan Diggs at wide receiver 14 as I'm looking at this. And I just, coming into last year, Pittman was underdrafted because we weren't sure what Anthony Richardson could do throwing the ball and if he could sustain a wide receiver 1. Pittman dominated last year with Gardner Minshew. Mm-hmm. I'm coming into this year with the same thing. I still don't know if Anthony Richardson can sustain a wide receiver 1. I think Anthony Richardson could break fantasy football. I also have the same, right after that sentence, it's I don't know if he can sustain a wide receiver 1, which is kind of a little bit of an oxymoron. But like in the couple of games that, well, Richardson, he really played and finished 2, left 2 other ones early. But I mean, Pittman wasn't dominant in any. The one game he had a decent double-digit fantasy points, but overall in the 4 games where Richardson at least logged like a snap and a half before he left games, 5.5 receptions and 55 yards per game for Pittman in those. So ultimately, I just keep coming back to, is his situation better than guys that are being drafted around him? Like, I really like looking around a couple around Pittman. Marvin Harrison's up there a little bit. I know his quarterback, he can sustain a top fantasy wide receiver. Chris Olave's in a good spot this year with fingers crossed with New Orleans. Devontae Adams is fine because he's going to get 1 billion targets. Drake London's everybody's favorite breakout receiver this year in the early parts of the first or second round. Then you got the Texans receivers, DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk, and Mike Evans behind it. Love the player. I have the same questions as I did coming into last year, and Pittman's price last year was significantly reduced compared to what it is this year. So I have the same question of last year: is can Anthony Richardson sustain a wide receiver 1 in fantasy? But now I'm doing a top 20 pick on it instead of like a top 40 or 50 where Pittman was sliding in last season. I'm just not going to have many shares of him at this price. Again, love the player, just hate the price.
Yep. And he's got competition for red zone targets this year too, with the Donovan Mitchell there. Going to be,
and there's 17 tight ends.
Yeah, exactly. So there's going to be decent competition for Michael Pittman. I don't hate the call at all. When you put it on the sheet, I was just like, oh man, I cannot wait to hear the argument for this. And you nailed it with that one. I'm tentative in drafting Michael Pittman, like you said, based on where he's going. So our must from the Indianapolis Colts is Jonathan Taylor. Our bust, based on where he's getting drafted, is Michael Pittman. And our maybe is not Jelani Woods. But Drew, who's our maybe?
Yeah, I figured I'd talk about Jelani Woods enough at this point in the offseason that I could switch it up. So John has a question related to my maybe pick. So, but before I get into, I'm obviously going to talk about Josh Downs, Colby and Chris. I want to throw this to you guys. So, would you guys rather roster AD Mitchell or Downs at Dynasty, Colby?
Mitchell.
Chris, what you think?
I'm gonna go Mitchell right now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
It's slightly. It's not like the space between them isn't large.
I think it's fair, though. I mean, I think if Mitchell does hit, I think he has more upside than what Josh Downs does.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess it depends on what you are as a fantasy manager. Like, I'll get into this more obviously here in a minute, but like I feel like Downs has shown us that he can at least play at the NFL level, that he has it, but he's going to be a full-time slot receiver, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. We've seen slot receivers have strong fantasy seasons, but if AD Mitchell does hit, he'll be playing on the outside. He's got the field stretching ability. Anthony Richardson has the big arm that can take advantage of that. So there is more upside there with Mitchell. And then there's the unknown is always interesting too. So it really just, I guess, depends on the risk you're willing to take as a fantasy manager. But we did lose one viewer, unfortunately. Rhett said since there's no Jelani, he's done with the show. So we lost one viewer, but you win some, you lose some. So Josh Downs, his ADP right now is at wide receiver 62. I've got him 10 spots ahead of that at wide receiver 52. And whenever you get that deep into the draft, it's not really that big of a difference in the grand scheme of things. But Chris, I mean, I know you already know how high I am on Richardson, and even though I expect him to run plenty, I don't think all of his value, like he's not going to be able to finish as the quarterback 4 where I have him at just by running. Like he's going to have to do something in the air. And I came away last year thinking that he was better as a passer than I expected him to be. And he seems like a guy that is going to continue to improve year after year. From everything I've read about him, listened from other people, it sounds like he doesn't lack anything in work ethic. So I do think that he will continue to progress. Now, will that progression be enough next year to lift these guys to fantasy success is something we're going to have to, you're going to have to basically decide where you set on that. And I think that it will be. I think that this offense is going to be good enough to support 2 guys at least being in the top 50 receivers. And so I do think that somebody in this offense is being underdrafted. And I've talked plenty about my love for Jelani Woods and the fact that I do think he's a great value at ADP. But my personal pick for this year in redraft to end up being the second option in this passing offense is Josh Downs. And I talked about him probably being a slot receiver, but I don't think it's out of this world to think that Richardson's going to end up falling in love with the guy that's going to end up occupying the middle of the field a lot for him. And he has great hands. Only had 3 drops last year. He's great in contested catches. According to reception perception, he won almost 73% of his contested targets that they sampled to build his reception perception profile. So, I mean, the things that you would want your slot receiver to do well, he does really well. And then on top of that, he was in the 93rd percentile against man and 82nd percentile against zone last year. Like the dude, he can just play ball. And so I think if you put him out there it's not crazy to think he ends up earning the second most targets behind Michael Pittman with how frequently he's going to be on the field in the slot. So I think this Colts offense is going to be really good this year. And Josh Downs has already shown us a glimpse of how good of a player he can be at the NFL level, so I can easily see him beating out his ADP.
Yeah. I mean, I was a big Josh Downs fan when he was coming out of UNC, entering the NFL. I was very bullish on him. He took a bit of a hit for me with the lack of production that he did have in his rookie year. But I'm excited for him entering, coming into this season, especially if Anthony Richardson can stay healthy. But if he doesn't, they got Joe Flacco there, right?
Yep.
So maybe I'm not too worried about him then. Or Jelani Woods at that point.
You better really like Jelani Woods at that point.
Colby, any words on Josh Downs? Do you own any Josh Downs? Are you drafting Josh Downs and Scott Fishbowl with the possibility that he might be returning kicks?
We'll have to see. I'm in the draft at Charlotte live this weekend, so I'll actually be heading out there and getting to do the a live SFB 14, so that'll be interesting. I look at Josh Downs, and like when you look, it's like the ADOT's underwhelming. The yards per route run isn't exactly overwhelming, but then again, as like a slot receiver, like his numbers in those departments aren't far off from the likes of like Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's just about how he's used. My thing would be if they didn't draft Adonai Mitchell where they did, I would be very confident that Downs plays in the 2 wide receiver sets, because Alec Pierce is he's not been good since he's come into the league.
No,
it's gonna come down to, honestly, if let's say Downs, because right now everyone loves this term for pole position right now in terms of leaders. I'm seeing that phrase all the time now. If Downs does have the pole position for the second outside receiver and 2 wide receiver sets, how long is it until Adonai Mitchell takes it from him? That's where my concern kind of lies. In redraft, maybe Downs is the one where you hope for a couple big games early. He does get Houston. I believe it's week 1. And Houston's slot corner, as of right now, I think is probably going to be Desmond King, probably the most attackable of those corners. So maybe Downs is in a good spot week 1. You look to sell high after a couple weeks in the season before the Adonai Mitchell takeover. Maybe that's the path with him.
Yep. There it is. Great insight there. Our must bust and maybe from the Indianapolis Colts, our must player, Jonathan Taylor, our bust player, Michael Pittman, and our maybe player, Josh Downs. Let's head into the Jacksonville Jaguars. A must bust and maybe from this team, a team that's looking to compete for the AFC South crown this season. They got Trevor Lawrence, who's looking to take another step forward in his professional career. But Trevor Lawrence didn't make this list. So, Drew, tell us who the Jags must is.
Yeah, for me, it's Travis Etienne. I've got him up at running back 7. The last I saw the ADP was around running back 10. And I mean, for me, it's just I don't think that much has changed from last year. I mean, he finishes the running back 6 in points per game, and the running back room looks exactly like it did last year. Whatever we saw Etienne get, 216 or 267 rushing attempts, another 73 targets. And I do believe that Doug Peterson wants to get other running backs involved, and he doesn't want to use Travis Etienne as much. I believe him whenever he says that, but whenever it comes down to it, I don't think they're going to be able to help themselves because they're simply just not guys behind him that can get it done. I'm not a Tank Bigsby guy. I actually think maybe this is because I wasn't a Tank Bigsby guy coming out, and I have always loved Dearness Johnson. I don't know, but I think Dearness Johnson's the second best running back in that room personally, and I don't think I have to worry about him really seeing the field. And it just, after rolling out Tank Bigsby so many times and seeing what they're having to sacrifice from a talent standpoint to give Travis Etienne a break, I think he's just going to end up finding himself in a very similar role, at least for one more year. Maybe next year in the draft, they bring in somebody that can actually challenge Etienne for the work, because even though I do think Etienne's a good running back, like there's not a ton of his efficiency metrics that just scream that he's like super elite and he's unreplaceable, but I don't think there's anybody on the roster right now that we should be worried about taking touches away. And maybe he does lose a few here and there, but I just can't see a big shift in his role from last year to this year. So I think that he could have a very similar season, because I think that this Jaguars offense is going to be just as good, if not better, than it was last year. And so for me, Travis Etienne, he's not a guy that I'm worried about. He was a guy that we were high on as a show last year, and it worked out pretty well for us. And so as long as the running back room stays the way it is, I'm going to continue to bet on Travis Etienne, and for at least for this year, that's what we have to go off of. And so, yeah, give me Etienne and his ADP all day.
Hopefully they draft his brother next year and his brother takes his job.
That would be cold-blooded, man.
A little Trevor Etienne taking Travis Etienne's job. He is, at least maybe, the better Etienne. So the Jaguars must is Travis Etienne, running back, a player that finished as a top 5 fantasy points per game running back last year. You're going to want to invest in them again.
Where are you at with him, Colby?
I don't want to give all my players away. That's the only problem. Coming on this show with you, I'm talking about them. It is not an impossibility that he ends as the RB1 overall. Like, the potential is there. Like, I mean, we want to talk about it. He had 267 carries last year and he had 58 receptions. That wasn't far off from McCaffrey. McCaffrey's more efficient, obviously. Yeah. But when you look at McCaffrey, he had 272 carries, so 5 more, obviously 1 less game than Etienne, and he had 67 receptions. Etienne was within 15 touches of Christian McCaffrey. Touchdowns are there. It's a good, I don't like Trevor Lawrence, but it's a good offense. So, like, there's a lot there. Like, Etienne is one of those guys. If we're going to look at some of these guys, like around where he's being drafted, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Pacheco, Rashad White, Etienne, Etienne. I don't know why you would take any of those other ones above Etienne. It's such a good opportunity. And like you said, they might want to use their other running backs. Well, they all suck. And Etienne's good. And like, he's the only one they can trust. So like, he's in line for a massive workload again. It's kind of similar to Joe Mixon in that it doesn't matter if he's not overly efficient and McCaffrey efficient. He's getting McCaffrey usage and you're getting him in the 2nd or 3rd round. Like, yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm missing something every time I draft him. I'm like, I don't understand how I continue to get this guy. I don't know. He's a slam dunk on this team.
Yeah. Agreed. So Travis Etienne is your must-draft player from the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm going to give you a bust player that is hot in the fantasy Twitter streets. That is Evan Ingram, tight end for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And for me, when I dove into what Evan Ingram did last year, a career year for him in both receptions and I believe yardage and touchdowns across the whole season. But a lot of his hot streak came with Christian Kirk out of the lineup. Without Christian Kirk, 61 targets, 50 receptions, 439 yards, and 4 touchdowns in 6 games. With Christian Kirk, 82 targets, 64 receptions, 524 yards, 0 touchdowns across 11 games. He averaged nearly double the amount of fantasy points per game with Christian Kirk in the lineup than he did with Christian Kirk out of the lineup than he did with Christian Kirk in the lineup. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars have also drafted field stretching wide receiver Brian Thomas. They brought in Gabe Davis. As much as Gabe Davis is probably going to be nothing in this offense, they did bring him in to soak up some of the targets that Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones did vacate in that offense. So he's being drafted as tight end 7 right now, ahead of guys like George Kittle, Jake Ferguson, David Njoku, Brock Bowers, which I'm fine with taking Evan Ingram over David Njoku. I'm still projecting Evan Ingram to get a high amount of targets, but I'm not seeing him reach that amount that he had last year. I just think he's going to take a big step back with a healthy Christian Kirk, with Brian Thomas in that offense, and with Gabe Davis. I think I'm going to be approaching this season with caution when I'm drafting Evan Ingram.
Interesting. When Christian Kirk was out weeks 14 to 18, as I look at it here, Ingram had 3 games right there with 28 or more snaps in the slot. while Kirk was healthy, he never had that amount in any of those games. So he definitely moved out a little bit, saw some
His
more
role
targets.
changes.
So, yep. Did a little bit, to say the least.
So you want Evan Ingram if Christian Kirk's hurt? Proceed with caution with Evan Ingram if Christian Kirk is in the game. So
I don't think we're allowed to do conditional draft picks. I don't know how that. I don't think that's quite a thing yet. I don't think Sleeper's done that yet.
Start. Yeah, exactly. Let's get into the maybe from the Jacksonville Jaguars. I kind of just touched on them a little bit there. Colby, who's the maybe from this team?
Yeah, it's Brian Thomas. I mean, I'm not a Gabe Davis guy, so I'm just going to pretend that he's not even there. Love Christian Kirk. Yeah, love Christian Kirk this year. But, I mean, there's just an elite athletic profile that we're banking on here. Like, I looked over at player profile, and they have Thomas at 98th percentile 40-yard, 99th percentile speed score, 83rd percentile burst score. And we're pairing an elite athletic profile, college domination, with a good opportunity right away in his rookie season. I think the one thing I think is interesting, and where I could see Thomas making a splash right away from week one, while his role continues to develop and he gets familiar with the game, he very well could become red zone option number one, other than Etienne, obviously, because I'm all aboard that train. But from the receiving side, I mean, Thomas is 6'3", and when you look last year, Trevor Lawrence, 50% completion rate in the end zone, 45.8% inside the 10-yard line, and only Gardner Minshew had fewer passing touchdowns than Lawrence in the red zone last year of quarterbacks with 50 or more passing attempts. Now, if he's going to do that again because Etienne's going to run them all in, fine by me. That's all good. I'll take it. But if he is going to throw it, a fast 6'3" dude on the outside in Brian Thomas, like, it very well could be the first couple weeks, 3 for 39 and a touchdown, 5 for 52 and a touchdown. And once they realize that the mistake they made with Gabe Davis, Thomas becomes wide receiver number 2, we start getting that nice blend of, we're going to get the red zone opportunities with a regular volume as he's seeing, I don't know, 6 to 8 targets a game or something like that. So Thomas is a maybe, depending on where you're playing. His ADP can get a little nuts. Best ball, it's very high. I feel like I'm drafting him at ceiling. Whereas when I go over to the some NFFC data, he comes in at like wide receiver, like 45. Very, very palatable there. He seems a little bit higher on underdog. I have a harder time taking him over there, at least right now. I just feel like I'm drafting at ceiling. But overall, there's a lot to like with Thomas's profile and his opportunity.
Yeah, we were big on Brian Thomas heading in to the rookie draft season, especially when he got drafted to the Jacksonville Jaguars, with them moving on from players like Zay Jones and Calvin Ridley, needing that kind of elite wide receiver, and they hope they found that with Brian Thomas from LSU, program that seems to produce elite wide receivers, unless your name is Terrace Marshall. So the Jacksonville Jaguars must bust and maybe must. Drew gave us Travis Etienne, bust. I gave you Evan Ingram, and our maybe player from the Jacksonville Jaguars is wide receiver Brian Thomas. We got one more team to touch on, and that is probably the team that is going to finish last in this division, the Tennessee Titans. Let's touch on a must bust and maybe from this team, if there is any. Colby, if there is a must on this team, who is it and why?
Yeah, for the Titans, must takes a little different shape than maybe some of the guys on the other.
Musty.
Because we all love quarterbacks outside of the top, like 24 at their position being drafted as a must here. I think there's a lot to like with Will Levis. We talked about Dalton Schultz kind of being a risk-free pick as like your backup tight end. I kind of feel that way with Levis at quarterback. Howard Bender's done a lot of writing and content talking about Will Levis, and I've kind of flipped the script a little bit on him. I still despise the Titans. I'm throwing that out there right away from the beginning. But I mean, Levis has a pretty decent college profile. He now is a coach who has a documented track record of a relatively high octane passing attack. Like, he was the OC in Cincinnati for the last couple of years, he being Brian Callahan. And they only had one season where they were in the bottom half of the league in passing attempts. And look what Tennessee did. They got rid of Derrick Henry and what I'm going to establish as the run first regime. And then he now has Calvin Ridley. He's got D-Hop, Traylon Burks, whatever you might think of him. Tyler Boyd, he's got the 2 running backs who are both good catching passes out of the backfield. A tight end who was everyone's favorite breakout candidate last year who didn't do it. But there's plenty of weapons there for Will Levis. And if there's one thing we saw last year, despite some struggles, he is willing to throw the ball downfield. He had a 10.5 yard average depth of target last year. So at the very least, you may have some inconsistency, but he's looking downfield and he's got weapons that can get down there. So honestly, with Will Levis, draft him as a backup, give him 3 or 4 weeks. And if you drop him, your 15th round pick isn't killing you. Whatever you draft him, it's not going to hurt. So take a flyer on him as your backup quarterback in late, or if you're doing best ball drafts, take him as a QB3 and hope for the best.
Yeah. Drew is well averse in Will Levis, aren't you, Drew?
I'm a Kentucky guy, man. Come on, I can't help it. We don't have a lot to get excited about during football season, so it's easy to hold on to the ones that we do get excited for.
Yeah, and I was really low on Will Levis coming into the NFL, but I'm kind of excited for this season. Like you mentioned, Colby, how we seen Callahan treat Jake Browning in Cincinnati and what he was able to do with that quarterback. He should be able to at least do the same things with Will Levis and the weapons that he has at his disposal. So, yeah, I don't hate it on a team that is lacking any real potential for fantasy football managers. That's the must draft for the Tennessee Titans. Drew, who's the bust?
Yeah, and this one's nothing spicy whatsoever. I'm going to keep this as short because it's really not that complicated. Like whenever I look at the Titans offense, man, where they're going in drafts, I'm either right in line or I'm ahead of ADP on Levis, on Pollard, on Spears, on Ridley, on Hopkins. Basically, the only guy across the board that my rankings have lower than ADP is Chig. And so I'm not going to get on here and lie and tell you, oh, this guy's a bust whenever I don't actually feel it. And so it's a boring pick, but it's the only guy that I'm lower than ADP on. And I think Ridley and Hopkins are going to be the clear top 2 options in the passing offense. And then between the fact that they do have 2 talented pass catching backs, they have Chig, they have Tyler Boyd. Like, I'm just not really sure who's going to end up being the third option in the passing game. And I don't think that they're going to throw enough for it to matter anyway. And so at his ADP, I don't think there's any reason to take Chig whenever you can take a shot on a guy like Javon Baker, or you could see what kind of role Deontay Foreman has early on for the Browns, see if he gets those early down carries. You could take a shot on him instead, or you could just draft Jelani Woods, because I'm going to get Jelani Woods in this episode one way or another. And so you could take Jelani Woods instead of taking Chig. At least there's a picture I could paint where Jelani Woods is the second target for the Colts. That doesn't exist for Chig. And so even though his ADP is as low as it is, I still don't think it's low enough. And I think my ranking still might not even be low enough on him. I think I might need to push him down even further. And so it was a boring pick, but that had to be the pick for the Titans.
I mean, it's a cop-out, Drew, but that's all right.
It is what it is, man. I already had to call one top 15 fantasy asset a bust tonight. That's good enough for me.
You could have picked Treylon Burks, too. I would have expected you to pick
that's
Treylon
even
Burks.
bigger cop-out.
So tight end Chizik is the bust. The maybe for the Tennessee Titans running back, Tony Pollard, and he's a maybe because he's currently being drafted as the running back 29. That is RB3-ish, RB4-ish value for a player that could come out weekly and put up RB2 numbers for you. You'll take that to the bank week in and week out. He was dealing with a little bit of an ankle injury when he was with the Dallas Cowboys coming into the season last year. So that might have hampered a little bit of what his production could have been with the Dallas Cowboys. But I kind of like his upside with the Tennessee Titans. They went out there, they signed him in free agency, they brought him in. I'm expecting the Tennessee Titans to use him as the primary back for this season. He does have Tajee Spears there. I believe Tajee Spears is going to cut into a healthy amount of his workload. But if you're a 0 RB drafter and you want to accumulate those late round running backs, Tony Pollard with the running backs that are going around him could see a lot more volume than the players that are going in that same area. Javonte Williams, Raheem Mostert, Jalen Warren, Zach Moss. I'm okay taking Tony Pollard. Maybe Raheem Mostert I might take ahead of Tony Pollard just because we know what he can do and we know what his role is in that Miami offense. But I'm okay taking Tony Pollard in this spot. And with the value that you're going to get him at, he is the maybe out of this offense for me.
And maybe we'll see a return to efficiency for him without being the bell cow back. So maybe it's one of those we kind of talk about, well, volume will do away with any inefficiency issues, at least from a fantasy perspective. But maybe for Pollard, maybe a cap of 12 to 15 touches is what's best. Get 100, get 12 to 15 touches at 100% versus 20 to 25 at like 75%. And I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where maybe less is more for him. And in this offense, it'll be interesting to see too, because Titans running backs did have a lot of targets last year, whereas the Bengals didn't. So does Callahan come over? We've obviously seen Mixon have some pretty decent pass catching years over there. So, and honestly, with the offensive line situation in Tennessee, screen passes might be a pretty good bet for that offense, especially the running back to try to help. So yeah, Pollard's interesting. I'm going to take a cop-out answer. I really don't have an opinion on him right now, to be honest. It's kind of, if he's there, I've taken him, and I've also not. So I don't have a solid opinion yet.
Yeah, that's a good summary of how it feels. Honestly, it really does. I know whenever everything first popped off in free agency and Pollard signed with Tennessee, my immediate reaction was, I'm going to have a ton of Tajay Spears because I just want the guy that's cheaper. And like Pollard is going to be so expensive because I thought that he might still carry some name value. But now that his value has gotten here in drafts, like I really don't mind where he's going. Like I still do prefer Tajay Spears because I can wait a little bit, but the gap is a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be. So I'm fine taking both of the running backs at cost. Just taking a stab at each of them. I don't mind the value at all. I thought he was going to be coming in higher than this.
Yeah, so he's a maybe draft player across the board. It was a little bit worrying last year. 44th in yards per touch and 37th in yards created per touch. So like you mentioned, Colby, you're hoping that the volume can kind of outweigh his lack of efficiency, but he was dealing, like I said, with a bit of an ankle injury heading into the season. So that's our must bust and maybe for the Tennessee Titans. Our must is Will Levis, as icky as that sounds. Our bust is Chizik, and our maybe is Tony Pollard. That's all the players across the board. That is the AFC South, a must bust and maybe player from each team across the division. I'll just touch quickly on each one. From the Houston Texans, our must was Joe Mixon. Bust was Stefan Diggs, and our maybe was Dalton Schultz. From the Indianapolis Colts, our must was Jonathan Taylor. Our bust was Michael Pittman Jr., and our maybe was Josh Downs. From the Jacksonville Jaguars, you got to draft Travis Etienne. Our bust was Evan Ingram, and our maybe was Brian Thomas Jr. And then as we just touched on them, the Tennessee Titans, our must is Will Levis, bust Chizik, and our maybe player was Tony Pollard. Before we let you go, Colby, let's get some hot takes from around the frames from each team in the division. We'll start with you and the Houston Texans. What do you got for us?
I made sure I didn't bury the lead here and mentioned it right away in the beginning, kind of teased it. But plus 850 over on DraftKings Sportsbook, Texans to win the AFC and represent the AFC in this year's big game that happens in February. So Texans take down the AFC.
I love it. I love it. That would be a lot of fun. I wouldn't be mad at that at all.
That would be a lot of fun because the AFC is thick with competing teams. So them being able to take that down, I love it. Drew, Indianapolis Colts, and you cannot say Jelani Woods finishes as the tight end one.
Fine. Indianapolis Colts are a top 3 scoring offense in the NFL in points per game, and then Jelani Woods also dominates. they were already the 11th. They were already the 11th highest offense in points per game last year, with Gardner Minshew most of the year at quarterback. No Anthony Richardson. Jonathan Taylor missed a good chunk of it. So get a full season of an offense coached by Shane Steichen, A-Rich at quarterback, JT, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, A.D. Mitchell, and yeah, you guessed it, a healthy Jelani Woods back in this offense. They're going to be a top 3 scoring offense in the NFL.
All right. My hot take for the Jacksonville Jaguars is that head coach Doug Peterson is fired by the bye. So their bye is, I believe, week 8-ish, 9-ish. If you look at their schedule before the bye, Miami Dolphins, loss.
Fair.
Cleveland Browns, I think, would be up in the air. Toss up.
Yeah,
Buffalo
I'd
Bills,
probably lean
loss.
Jacksonville. Fair.
Houston Texans, loss.
Fair.
That's 1-3. Chicago Bears, up in the air. Chicago Bears got
Close.
a good defense. We'll give it to the
good game.
Jaguars. New England Patriots, give it to the Jaguars. 500 team. Green Bay Packers.
I think it's another close one. That got to be a really
Eagles.
good matchup. Toss up. Philly.
Minnesota Vikings, they probably beat the Vikings.
Yeah.
And then Detroit Lions, I think Detroit takes them. So they're below 500 by their bye. And I think I'd take Doug Peterson's first coach to get the boot. Thank you, Corey. It's appreciated. I will get to it as soon as I get off of here. We got one more team for a hot take. Does anyone want to give me a hot take for the Tennessee Titans?
Yep, the team I despise the most. I'm doing it. All right. The Titans are the last team to get their first win this season. They're going to open up the year 0-7. They don't have a chance of winning. They're going 0-7 to begin the year. They get the Bears, Jets, Packers, Dolphins, Colts, Bills, Lions, and then they get the Patriots on November 3rd. Titans are opening up 0-7.
I could see it, man.
Colby.
I hadn't looked at their schedule in depth, but I could see that really playing out. And Will Levis has definitely not got a job. Like they're drafting a quarterback next year for sure. Oh man,
last winless team. Titans are plus 900. They're actually the third odds for it. Patriots at plus 600, Panthers at plus 750, Titans at plus 900. So I'm gonna take that Titans.
Yeah, I'd be willing to bet they probably have the toughest start to the year out of any of those teams too. That's brutal. I like it.
All right, Colby, we're going to let you get out of here. The frame is yours. Let the people know where they can find you. Let them know what you got going on inside of fantasy football and outside of fantasy football.
Yep, a lot of fantasy baseball stuff right now over at Fantasy Alarm, but fantasy football is right around the corner, so we'll get into that. Follow me over on X at Colby Conway. I'll be trying to announce some of my picks in the live draft at Scott Fish Bowl in Charlotte, North Carolina this weekend. But you can see my writing over at Fantasy Alarm. And once again, over on X at Colby Conway.
Again, we really do appreciate you taking the time to join us and break down the AFC South. We appreciate each and every person who joined. Drop the comment in the chat, like the stream, or subscribe to the channel. Head over to X or Facebook or TikTok and follow at Fantasy and Frames wherever you can. Your support is greatly, greatly appreciated. Drew, any final words for Colby or the people before we get out of here?
No, go Jelani Woods.
All right.
One more time.
For Drew at Drew3MR, for Colby at Colby R. Conway, I'm Chris. This is Fourth and Frames. Toodles.